Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Vadra Kimberly Kopak, and I currently work at the Simon Center for the Professional Military Ethic here at the United States Military Academy. Now, some of you may not be familiar with West Point or what we do at the Simon Center, so I'll give you a brief introduction to what we do. The Simon Center's vision is to serve as West Point's connective tissue for the stewardship of the Cadet Honor System, character education and rehabilitation, the coaching and mentoring of our cadet character committees focused on respect, trust, and honor, and the study of officership. And the study of officership is captured in our facilitation of the superintendent's capstone course called MX400, Officership. And I currently serve as its assistant course director. Now, through this course, in our support of cadet character education, we strive to help bring them under, the umbrella of a common Army standard, while at the same time helping them discover the foundations of their individual character, dedicated to the promotion of dignity, respect, and the internalization of the 7 Army values. Now, in January of 2020, I published an article that pulls concepts from our curriculum on moral leadership and translated it into a framework to support the operational Army. And I've shaped this article into today's webinar, where I hope to speak to the ready and resilient community as you all seek to train and support your soldiers to, like us at USIMA, develop leaders of character. On this slide, you can see our upcoming agenda. And although this will be mostly a one-way conversation until we reach the Q&A portion, I do not expect you to remain in receive mode. This is an interactive webinar, so you should be taking reflective notes, and I want you to share your thoughts with each other and with me via the chat. And as we navigate these following slides, I want you to look at these questions and these concepts through the lens of the individual needs of your organizations. The main elements of my brief are developed from hundreds of hours of conversations with soldiers, leaders, and cadets, and you will see their thoughts interweaved throughout these concepts, starting with our next slide. So I want you to take a moment to read these statements with me, and I will read them out loud. We talk about the Army lying to ourselves, and yet we just can't accept the truth that all this training is worthless. We are adults. People are going to do what they're going to do, and no policy memo or training is going to stop it. So why make us all suffer through yet another "don't rape each other" or "don't kill ourselves" brief? Most of us know not to do it, and you're not reaching those who would consider it. If anything, you're just putting the idea in their heads. Now, this is some feedback from some training briefs that I have previously helped facilitate. Have you heard comments like these before? What assumptions are they making in these statements? Are these statements representative of the Army? Or is this just motor pool talk? What are the subsequent effects or consequences of statements like these if they're made in more public forums? Lastly, are these valid? Or are they short-sighted and immature? So maybe you haven't heard anything like this, but maybe you've received some nonverbal feedback from training and conversing with your soldiers. And what you're seeing here is a photo of me giving a group of soldiers training on land navigation. Now, judging by this photo, how do you think this training is being received? I get varying answers. I would say on the whole, it's always a a mix of, some people are paying attention, but on the whole, it looks like they're pretty disengaged. Lean back, looking away, looking at something else. So what causes this type of posture and demeanor in the receipt of military training? Some of the soldiers you see in this photo gave me feedback that this training should have been made optional for the few who think they may need it. After all, they've already been trained and know how to do land nav. They knew what they were getting themselves into, and if they were not prepared for land nav, then that should be on them. Why punish the group for a few? Anything about this sound familiar? So the next day, the cadre, including myself, we walked the course. And at some point, I saw almost half of the platoon. And most of them were stopped at intersections trying to get their bearings because they couldn't find their points. At the end of the day, a chunk of the platoon required a retrain and a reevaluation, about 40% of them. And many of these retrains were the ones who rolled their eyes through that initial training, confident they would be a first-time go. So what do you think happened? They said they were good at land nav. Could there be a parallel between this and the previous quotes you saw on the last slide? The soldiers in the previous slide said that not everyone should suffer to cater to the needs of a select few struggling to maintain the standard. But maybe they are part of those select struggling few, but are too falsely confident in their own skills to realize it. Just like some of these soldiers. When it comes to character education and ethical and resilience training, how do we, as leaders, remain proactive and engaging so we inspire soldiers to think and behave beyond what we are seeing on these previous two slides? We do not want to wait until a soldier receives a no-go and requires a retrain. These critical topics and issues we face in the Army, especially as they pertain to character, are not things that we should remain reactionary to. These are things that people live with every single day. And what I've told cadets here is that your hour of inconvenience could be related to a topic that their battle buddy has to live with every day, like a heavy rucksack that they cannot take off. So why don't you care about that? So this is where we begin to get a little engaging. So I want you to pull out your pen and paper or whatever you're choosing to take notes with. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background before we get into the exercise. Now, there were a few problems that caused these land navigation no-goes. But in that list, if I made this list right now, what were the biggest problems I was dealing with as their trainer? Yes, map and land navigation skills are a problem, and solving them will get me that win, that short-term win. They will pass. But given the comments and critique I got the night prior to that first evaluation, was that truly the biggest problem or the root problem? I argue no. So in the end, I got them to where they needed to be to pass. But that was just a symptom to a bigger problem at hand. A problem that is not just conducive to land nav. It's attitude. A soldier can assume that just because they've had previous exposure to content, they are trained. I call this the like riding a bike trap. Land navigation should be as easy as riding a bike. I'll just pick up where I left off. Basic rifle marksmanship is like riding a bike. Is it? In the Army, we know that we repeat tasks and we retrain often. It allows us to refamiliarize with content that may not be fresh, reaffirm skills to breed confidence in the individual or the unit, or to certify. Also, to move beyond just rudimentary memorization and regurgitation methods of learning. We can be given an opportunity for some critical thinking, some higher levels of thinking. So while the tasks, the subject matters might be the same, our ways of thinking about things do not. They're continuously evolved through maturity and experience. So think about how you receive certain types of character-based training, as a cadet, as a young soldier, versus you in a leadership role. Do you think about it differently? I know I do. So we as leaders are the trainers, the mentors, the problem solvers of our organizations. And hopefully, as we seek to solve these problems like doctors, we're identifying and treating diseases. All right, not slapping band-aids on symptoms. So right now, I want you to begin writing down a list of the problems you're facing in your current assigned role. And after you start to write down these problems, and you just continue to do this throughout the webinar and in your free time, as you continue to write down these problems, I want you to start categorizing them, identifying any patterns, any trends. Place them under categories of these bigger problems. And after you identify these bigger problems, I want you to start asking yourself why. Why is this happening? Over and over until you begin to identify these diseases, these root problems in your organizations. So let's go back to that LandNav scenario. There was a big problem. Almost half of the platoon was a first-time no-go on their evaluated LandNav. That's definitely a problem. But why? They lacked fundamental LandNav skills required to pass. Why? Well, it's because they aren't well practiced and they weren't paying attention to the fundamentals training. But why? Because they took their training for granted and they have poor attitudes. But why? We could keep this going and going, and maybe it just comes down to their previous leadership. They were mentored to think like this. That's the problem. Now let's look at the crime of sexual violence. That is a big problem. Is it the root problem? Is it deeper than that? Is it a lack of intervention? Maybe. But is that lack of intervention caused by apathy? Immature concern for what our peers think? And what is it about individuals that even care so much about their own reputation that they would let these smaller, these red flag type of events cascade into something as heinous as sexual assault? To avoid drama. Sound familiar? So these are just some examples to demonstrate how to navigate this exercise. So when you train and rehabilitate your soldiers, are you treating the symptoms or the root causes, the disease of character flaws in individuals that affect the discipline of the entire organization? So in my experience in 2 battery commands, as a staff officer, as an educator, the majority of the ethical or discipline issues I face boil down to one word: character. Just like my land navigation story, some soldiers blame external factors like the terrain and the time limits unfair and visibility of the signs due to vegetation and the weather. But like I said, the true problem was that they took their training for granted. They didn't build their skills, and they lacked the self-awareness to ask for help. So it is the responsibility of Army leaders and those charged with preserving the character of our formations, like yourselves, to not just assume, but to make deliberate efforts to educate the force on where they are, where they need to go, and how to get there, both in land navigation and in ethics. The following slide will outline my 5-step process that I use to train soldiers and cadets on how to navigate both the physical space and the ethical space. I want to emphasize that I cannot give you a one-size-fits-all solution to your problems. And this presentation's intent is not to try Instead, I hope to give you some questions and concepts that will help you develop some tools to create dialogue between you and your fellow leaders in the hopes of developing unique strategies targeted towards your organization's needs. This requires you to, at whatever your level, get down to that grassroots soldier space and learn what will inspire them. So in my article titled How the Moral Compass Stays on Azimuth, I try to educate Army leaders on how to get yourself and your organization's bearings, how to course correct, and how to get to your desired endpoint. And these are the 5 steps to navigate the physical and ethical space. As many of you know, when you take out a compass, you read the azimuth, and you start walking. And a slightly incorrect azimuth, just a degree or 2 off course, has minimal effects in the short term. 10, 15, 20 meters in front of you. But that small discrepancy over time and distance, maybe a couple clicks, can lead you significantly off course. This is similarly the case in navigating ethical decision making. Leadership requires an ethical, moral compass. And you're all part of this. I want you to take these steps and use them as a framework to shape how you train and mentor your organizations, to truly tackle the issues that cause whatever the focus is for your assigned duty or role. SHARP, resiliency, EO, command. The next slides will explain these steps in details and provide you some questions that you can ask your organizations. And if you follow this and you actually invest in this, you will truly get to know the inner works of the individuals in your unit. You will be able to customize and tailor your methods to suit the unique needs of your organization, to bring everyone under the same standard of the Army ethic. I also include some thoughts from soldiers, leaders, and cadets. I asked them to do some character self-reflection, both in interviews and in academic writing. And I extracted some quotes excuse me, to help give you an idea of where your training or conversations can and should go. So this first step, identify where you are. So knowing where to go is understanding first where you are. And I call this the moral baseline. Finding your moral baseline requires reflection. You must seek to understand your personal interpretations of right and wrong and determine the basis for those beliefs. Pardon me. So on the slide, you see some possible sources that have shaped how you think about right and wrong. And this is largely a personal decision. These are our personal beliefs. But let's not forget that we are each voluntarily part of a profession, the profession of arms. So when we sign up to serve and we raise our right hand, we agree to uphold a standard and a professional ethic. And leaders need to communicate these common sets of values and then find opportunities to help soldiers extract where they are in relation to it, which we'll get to in a few steps. So how do we figure out what these soldiers' baselines are? What we say and what we do every single day helps demonstrate our individual baselines. The challenge is every soldier is different. So it's through this knowledge that leaders can strategize how to unite under a common Army ethic. Otherwise, you are just providing cookie cutter training and support to those who may need more, less, or something completely different. An analogy I use to illuminate this point is the formation run. When a soldier falls out of formation, do you just keep running the formation harder and tell them to keep up? Maybe. Is it effective? Probably not. Oftentimes you end up wagon wheeling, right? You police them up, and you drive on with that person setting the pace. Because if you keep ignoring your soldiers' baseline fitness, you keep forcing them to keep up when they clearly need a different strategy, you are going to keep leaving them in the dust. So here are some statements made by soldiers in response to the questions I asked, helping them to extract their individual moral baselines. And it led to follow-on conversations about how this affected their day-to-day interactions and behaviors. And you're going to see these follow-on actions decisions towards the end of the presentation. So step 2, confirm where you're going. This means understanding the Army ethical framework. What is the Army's black and white criteria for differentiating right from wrong behavior? This requires you to do some self-study. The doctrinal foundation for the Army ethic is Chapter 1 of ADP 6-22, Army Leadership in the Profession. The Center for the Army Profession and Leadership has literature and training support packages and multiple case studies on their website. Your unit chaplains are trained in military ethics and provide great counsel. Once knowledgeable, you can now compare your individual baselines, your soldiers' individual moral baselines, to the Army's interpretation of right versus wrong, the Army ethic. So where are you? Where are your soldiers on this ethical framework? On the left there, kind of left center, you see this legal motivation of compliance and all the sources, right, that feed into that. Are your soldiers just doing the right thing because the black and white criteria is telling you to? And if it didn't exist, and there was no fear of punitive action, would their behavior change? Or are you on the right side of that framework? Doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. You've internalized these sources. You don't need a threat of punishment to be good. As the framework says, the right side is aspirational. How do we, as trainers and leaders, develop that? Soldiers and leaders that do the right thing because they're bought into it. It's the right thing to do. Again, some more responses from different soldiers who compared where they are to what the Army expects of them. So once you know where you are going, you need to plot your course to get there. You need to create your route plan. Consider how your personal morals nest within or possibly deviate from the Army's ethical framework. And that will help you with the direction in which you need to go, as well as how far away you are from your goal. Now, as we all know, as fellow orienteers, the course is much easier if our endpoints are close to where we start. We always hope when we're plotting our points they're going to be close to where we start. Now, some points are going to be closer to others, but in reality, we know that there are going to be some points that are going to require us to traverse some distance. So this last question on this slide is one that definitely has provoked thoughts in my ranks. What are you currently doing, saying, thinking that you do not want the Army to know? I usually get a reaction from that question. You can see people's eyes kind of bug. They kind of look down, in shame, because they know they have something. We all have something. So the follow-on questions, why do you think like that? If you know the Army doesn't agree, is it okay? What would you do if the Army found out? Would this be your hill to die on? And if not, why are you still doing, saying, and thinking things like that? Now these soldiers have reflected on their route plan, how close or far they are from their desired endpoint. Now one was very knowledgeable about where they should go, but was not willing to navigate the route. The other is a little bit more closely aligned between themselves and the Army's ethic. Step 4, identify your obstacles to movement. So I want you to write this down. Ask yourself, who is the best person you know? And think about the traits they have that resonate with you. And what is stopping you from being that? Why are you not the best person you know? And what stands in your way? What will cause your compass to stray off an accurate azimuth? I'm going to argue this is one of my most important steps. It's easy for me to navigate when paths are clear, well illuminated, and everything is in my favor. However, when the opposite happens, while I'm orienteering, steep elevation, metal ore, vegetation, a lack of illumination, these things can hinder my journey. So in the case of ethical leadership, these obstacles will be those internal and external factors that allow us to justify witnessing or even engaging in possible unethical behavior, or behavior we normally would not be okay with. Some examples of these factors include, peer pressure, careerism, time constraints, apathy. In this image, I share with you some varying ways that we justify doing or saying things we know are wrong. What about deployment? Who's a different person when they're deployed than when they're back home? Why? Is it the will to survive? That's definitely a considerable factor. And if that is, to what ends can your soldiers fall victim to survive? This is where deliberate engagement and structured reflection with your soldiers is essential, as it helps facilitate the 5th and final step. Now, before we get there, here are 2 different perspectives on how soldiers have approached these ethical obstacles in their interactions with their peers. Loyalty to one's peers versus loyalty to one's individual morals. Now, the 5th and final step is the enduring and continuous reevaluation of the previous criteria and steps throughout this journey. Is land navigation a set it and forget it task? Is ethical leadership a set it and forget it task? Or does that leave us room to fall into this like riding a bike thinking trap? This is especially important as you start to feel yourself, your soldiers, or your organization being pulled from the true and right azimuth by these previously identified obstacles. And in this graphic, I'm using these magnets, all the things that are pulling from our compass. So step 5, this reevaluation should be routine. Do not wait until things go wrong. You already know that navigation requires vigilance, as things are constantly changing. So what's changed for you since you've stepped off? Do you still know where you are? Where you are going? Are you knocked off course by any recent obstacles? If you have identified that you strayed from your planned route and are at risk of getting lost, this is the time to stop and course correct. Don't assume you're still on the right path. Just like my soldiers did when I found them out on the course, in those intersections, make strategic stops to verify. Trust, but verify. The sooner you identify any issues, the better the chances you have of being successful. Ethical leadership is a continuing process. The ever-changing nature of our personnel, our standards, and operating environment demand vigilance. So what the Army considered right 10, 15, 20 years ago may be different now. What's changed in the Army since you've joined? We should not be surprised on the land nav course when we get to where we think the point should be and we find that we're lost. So we should equally be unsurprised if ourselves, our soldiers, our organization is becoming, behaviorally or ethically lost. The soldiers in these quotes have acknowledged where they failed to course correct, or they found their own unique strategy to navigate these obstacles that would cause them to stray off this correct azimuth. So do you just put a compass in a soldier's hand, just send them out into the woods without any deliberate crawl, walk, or run training? I hope not. So while my moral azimuth model is a good one, we can't just give them this 5-step framework and hope they figure out how to be better people. So I want to use this model from a book we use in our officership course called Building Moral Strength, Bridging the Moral Judgment Action Gap. And you can see my citation there towards the bottom. With these concepts, we can help soldiers build the individual skills that not only will help them ethically navigate this moral azimuth model, but want to help their teammates do this as well. This model will help you identify where you are as a caregiver, a leader, a mentor, in relation to them. Have you helped to create an environment that will allow them to be morally strong enough to actually become better people? Or are we just crossing our fingers and hoping nothing happens under our watch? Starting in the top left circle, we have moral ownership and duty orientation. And I believe this is the foundation for building strong teams capable of traversing the obstacles on life's ethical course. Moral ownership, the psychological responsibility for not just your own actions, but of those around you. Duty orientation is our ability to loyally serve and faithfully support other members of the group to accomplish missions and honor its codes. So this is not just about people's ability to self-correct. This is not just about, hey, I'm good. I know I'm good. I don't need to attend this training. And if somebody else isn't good, then that's their problem. That's not how we operate. We are in an organization that should aspire to want to raise people up to be the best versions of themselves because it's the right thing to do. And our ethos demands we leave no one behind. And that is just as applicable to ethical behavior as it is on the battlefield. And West Point captures this idea beautifully in its honor code. I will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. And it's that last part, that toleration part, that forces the Corps to understand that their individual behavior is not their only focus. They should and must hold each other accountable. But most organizations and the operational army, they do not have this black and white toleration clause. So these ideas are more aspirational. We want people to feel ownership of each other because they want to, not just because it's their duty to. Now, how are you empowering soldiers and educating leaders to want to wagon wheel that formation, police up their battle buddies so that we accomplish our goal together, while at the same time finding ways to help our teammates get faster so they don't even have to fall out in the first place? Moral efficacy, the degree of confidence one possesses to act ethically. And this confidence is twofold. So on one hand, we have self-confidence. And on the other is confidence in the external resources and means to assist in the enactment of ethical action. And what are some of these external resources? It's all of you. We have victim advocates, we have EOAs, the chain of command, supervisors, chaplains, all of you out there. How are you making yourself available to people beyond required training, a task organization photo on a wall, and flyers in the bathroom? Yes, those are necessary, but is that it? Sometimes to take the ethical high ground, to come to you, people are going to have to traverse that extra mile in their individual route plan. Are you going that extra mile to come to them? What are you doing to develop that confidence that people have that you are a true resource for them in their times of need? Right, that last portion, moral courage. It's the third element of moral strength, and it's directly related to step 4 of my moral azimuth model, identifying obstacles. Moral courage is the ability to overcome obstacles to make the morally correct decision. What are these obstacles that stop us from doing the right thing, and how do we help people develop the psychological safety to meet and overcome them? Internal courage is influenced by leadership, these external resources. So how are you helping soldiers understand what their personal obstacles are so that they can figure out how to overcome them? You can't do this in like a one-time conversation. It's very hard to. You definitely can't do this standing in front of a crowded room during a working lunch. No. This means you have to actually know your soldiers, and you hear this all the time. But actually know your soldiers. They have to have that moral efficacy that they can open up to you and become vulnerable. It is unnatural for us to want to criticize ourselves. And that's what we're doing here. If we help our soldiers identify what their obstacles are, these things that make us fallible, that make us tempted. Because we all like to think that we're generally good people. I know I do. So this feels very uncomfortable because my character is my very being. So how are you helping navigate these uncomfortable conversations? These are good uncomfortable conversations. Nevertheless, they're not easy. And these are the million-dollar questions. How do we do this? So like I said previously, this depends on those problems that your organization have. That's why that first exercise is so important. You have to figure out what it's going to take to inspire your team. And I can't give you definitive answers, other than it's going to take some creativity on your end. But I will give you a very powerful moment that happened here at the Academy. So last fall, we hosted our Honorable Living Day. And it's very similar to a stand-down day. It's a day of no classes or extracurriculars, and instead we come together as a corps. Staff, faculty, and cadets to address and talk through some serious issues, many of which are character-based. And in this particular Honorable Living Day, we were focused on the prevention of sexual harassment and assault. And just like my initial slide, that had some cynicism. You could see cadets' faces beginning to glaze over within the first hour. But things were about to change. So the cadet in charge of the trust committee, who, in addition to building trusting teams at West Point, is very focused on this very specific and important topic of the prevention of sexual assault. She stood up in front of the entire corps, 1,000 people, of her peers and leaders and mentors. Cadet, now Second Lieutenant Sam Sullivan, a very well-respected member of the corps, who played rugby. She was considered very capable, and she was tough, and she was strong. She was a leader. People knew her, they knew of her, and what she did was something that demonstrated all 3 of these components. She put her own story of sexual assault out there for the first time. This tragic story of her lost innocence, what it took to overcome it. And she broke down in front of the entire corps. And you could say this is embarrassing, but I would say that people were more shocked. This was something that they weren't expecting her to do because she's so strong. And our superintendent, Lieutenant General Williams, consoled her as she put herself out there to combat one of these big problems that's facing the Corps, facing the Army, facing society. So this, this immature attitude of I don't know anyone who's been through this, therefore this is an inflated issue, and we're just doing these stand downs for show. Like, she got rid of, like, she eliminated that. Because she, in that act, became a person everyone knew. And she forced them to start caring about others. And doing this as the leader of the trust committee, as an external resource, right? She found a way to breed that efficacy, that confidence her peers could have in her that she's walked this hard path and she's there for them and she's willing to continue to be vulnerable in this position to show it. And what courage. She impacted West Point that day. You saw cadets and staff stand up little by little, emotionally affected, ready to seek the help where they needed, whether it was a chaplain or behavioral health specialists on standby. They were either seeking help or they were going to stand up for a friend or a teammate that they were concerned about, but previously were too scared to speak up about. And everyone walked away from that field to their barracks in silence. What Lieutenant Sullivan did that day is exactly what you need to do. So use these three components to help build yours and your soldiers' skills and confidence in the organization, each other, and as you, as a resource. And if they can buy into your commitment to them, they will be more committed to these reflective practices addressed in my 5-step moral azimuth model. And then we can move beyond this train to time type of mentality, this check the block requirement, and you can actually begin to positively impact people, who in turn will impact the entire organization. So now you're armed with information on how to identify root causes of problems, how to steer your organization to one of high moral fiber, and how to leverage your unique roles as leaders and educators and trainers to guide them there. So I'm going to circle back to some statements, the statements you've read earlier made by my former soldiers or cadets that I had the pleasure of interviewing and assessing for the past 2 years, to show you how impactful singular statements and reflection can be into assessing not only the moral compass of an individual, but how that compass drives their actions towards devastatingly positive or negative outcomes for the collective organization. Now, some names and ranks were removed and some verbiage was altered to protect their identities. Now, you may recognize these quotes from step 1, which is to identify where we are. So what were the outcomes of these thoughts? So that first quote, the one who reflected on the grandma rule, I don't want to do anything I couldn't tell my grandma. What this soldier did was at a bar, he stopped his friend from pressuring an inebriated woman to go home with him. And what were the repercussions? He lost some social credit. His friends never invited him back out. However, he did what he did because he is a reflection of his family. He is already thinking beyond his individual self. He's thinking about grandma. Second quote, this hustle attitude. By, with, and through, I'm going to do whatever it takes to succeed. They were caught violating the honor code here at West Point. They cheated. And they did this because they wanted to maintain a high GPA and remain in good standing. Because it's so competitive here at West Point. But is it the competitiveness of West Point? Is that the reason why they cheated? Or is it the obstacle they faced, which, due to the moral baseline that they came here with, they were not able to overcome? So step 2, confirming where we're going and what the Army tells us the right thing is. So this first quote, the soldier had some learning to do when it came to UCMJ. They lacked the knowledge of what the Army expects of them, which contributed to this event, where they were punished under Article 89 of UCMJ disrespect towards a superior officer, for posting disrespectful comments and racially disparaging internet memes about their commander. And I thought it wasn't a big deal because it's just social media. It's not a war crime. The second quote, we are looking at more of the aspirational side of the Army ethical framework. So this person has internalized their oath, thinking beyond, their own individual behavior. They believe their behavior is a reflection of the American people. And as a result, they reported their superior for fraud, waste, and abuse of government funds, wasting American taxpayer money at the expense of their career. This was during a critical evaluation period. So they had to overcome careerism as a potential obstacle. And they did. So creating our route plan, now that we know where we are, where we need to go, how are we going to get there? So we have two different thoughts here. So we have barracks lawyer, we have this more aspirational person, so let's look at the barracks lawyer, the first one. This person knew how to, fly under the radar of UCMJ action. Just enough to be dangerous, but not breaking any black and white rule. You may know people like this. This included, charging teammates to take their CQ shifts and to serve as lookouts for these wild parties in the barracks. So in this example, they knew where they needed to go, but they made some deliberate decisions to not walk this path. They know the path. They just don't want to walk it. They're not motivated to, as their current circumstances are benefiting them individually. And technically it's benefiting others, but it's definitely not for the right reasons. In that second quote, we see a cadet who believes in promoting a culture of dignity and respect. It's something close to their hearts. This is a powerful one. They stood up for an underclassman who had been given this humiliating, this disparaging nickname by their peers. The upperclassmen took on this nickname as well. And this cadet who was being made fun of didn't know it. So Cadet X, in this situation, confronted his upperclassmen peers about their behavior. This is inappropriate. And they were largely ignored. So in response, he wrote them the West Point version of negative counseling. He wrote his peers' counseling. And these counselings go into the big academy system and get put into cadet files for the remainder of their time here. So just think about that, right? Counseling your own peers, that takes a lot. And what this Cadet X, did not know at the time and found out much later was that this underclassman that he stood up for had previously attempted to end their life in high school due to bullying. They may have prevented a tragedy. Step 4, identifying obstacles. So we have two different thought processes here. So let's take a look. So this first quote, this idea of loyalty and the way it's sometimes misused. Right? Loyalty is important. It's an Army value. But loyalty to who? What are the factors that cause this misuse of loyalty, that actually make loyalty an obstacle to do the right thing? Right? In this soldier's case, they were on a team that had a very well-respected superior. However, this superior is making inappropriate remarks about the appearance and dress of what should have been protected populations, their subordinates. Now, this soldier reported it, chose loyalty to the Army over loyalty to the smaller team. And as a result, they were removed from the team for being a troublemaker. But they have no regrets. The second quote, I love this quote. I will be a woman on an island. I will do the right thing, and I don't care about burning bridges, what others think. Social credit is not an obstacle for them. And this soldier, despite being told to not cause drama for the unit, have you heard that before? They stopped a sexual assault happening in the middle of a party. In the middle of a party with others around. And she had to be a woman on an island. What was stopping her peers? These are the problems that you out there need to figure out, right? How are you going to help your soldiers be okay with the idea of being on an island? So this last step, this reevaluate the course correct step. Two different thoughts here. One, someone who is able to find a method to course correct. The other person fell victim. So what happened here? So the first one. So this person thought that they had the ability to confront others to do the right thing. They assumed, and you know how I feel about assuming. But when faced with a new obstacle, academics, they ended up becoming apathetic to what others were doing. They did not want to get caught up in drama, sound familiar, and be distracted. And because of that, they failed to report underage drinking, which led to a DUI where people got hurt. People got hurt, but their GPA was healthy. The individual needs and wants versus the collective. The second quote. This unique way of approaching reevaluation and real-time course correction. This one always makes me laugh. So this person fell victim to social pressure. They hazed a new teammate, and we know that is something we do not do and should not do in the Army. And this person, X, they found out later that this new teammate came from a very abusive household. And they were becoming psychologically and emotionally affected by this hazing, which was ongoing. And it woke this person up to the selfishness of their actions, failing to understand where people are coming from, how their behaviors affect people. Caring more about what others think than the psychological safety of a teammate who expects to be taken care of. So they reported their team, including themselves, for this behavior, and they were held accountable. They got in trouble, but they saw it as an act of penance. This became a concrete experience in their life. And this experience has changed the way that this soldier now navigates problems and these ethical obstacles, in particular, peer pressure. But they had to become a retrain in order to do so. So these last few slides demonstrate just how powerful deliberate reflection can be into assessing how people think, and how simple words give us a window into what drives their actions or ability to tolerate or intervene in the face of unethical behavior. How many serious incidents can be prevented? And how many teammates can be strengthened if we know how to arm our soldiers with true critical thinking and reflection tools, problem-solving tools, how to actually get them to know themselves beyond this superficial self-assessment of, I received this training, therefore I am trained, therefore I am knowledgeable, and need no more training. Just like my trainees learned the hard way on the LandNav course, that can result in false confidence. So whatever your role is, you have an active responsibility, a moral obligation, and an amazing opportunity to make a real change. So how will you move your training, your interactions with your soldiers, your touch points, your education beyond, X is bad, don't do X. This is what you should do if X is looming or X has happened, to deliberate conversation and reflection that actually tackles the true problems in your organizations, the root problems. Accomplishing the goals of building these stronger teammates in an environment of dignity, respect, and self-worth. Because to me, if we can figure that out, if we can actually make individuals better, create true leaders of character, a lot of these other issues are just going to disappear. That starts with you. So let's not wait until a soldier receives a no-go and requires a retrain. When it comes to these character-based issues, that no-go could change the trajectory of lives forever. And then we will truly be lost on this moral navigation course. So let's get our teams to find true north. And I want to thank you all for joining me today. I'm available via the email addresses here to discuss best practices, strategies, or if you have any lingering questions. My commitment to developing leaders of character extend beyond the hallowed granite walls of this amazing leadership institution. It extends to you all and to the Army, and I'm definitely here for you. So thank you very much for your time, and go Army and beat Navy. Bye.